Oh my God, what am I doing? Hi, welcome to Just Thinking Out Loud. My name is Desi-Rae. Our guest today is Alex Kaschuta. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce her name, but she will also, I guess, correct me. I discovered her because she and I were both interviewed by Benjamin Boyce a couple of months ago. And I saw that she was saying a lot about feminism and the nature of males and females and modern society and how that influences those relationships. And I found that interesting, both as it relates to my journey being someone who is not from the United States and in some ways comes from a society where certain things uh, are normal that might be seen as someone making a very specific choice that's against the culture, the current culture in quote unquote the West. She describes herself as a female Chad in her Twitter profile, which is hilarious. And I'm excited to just delve into some of these topics. So, Alex, could you please introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Yes. Hello there. I'm Alex Kaschuta. So you're very very close. Though even my family is not very certain how we should be pronouncing this. It's one of these like weird Central European names that has a mysterious origin. We don't know exactly where it comes from because record keeping is not great in Eastern Europe. So it's mysterious, and therefore I will accept any pronunciations. Anything goes. I am a writer. I used to be a journalist in a more official capacity back in the day, and yeah, I write essays, and I currently also have a podcast. So I'm essentially a cultural commentator, and I guess it's very similar to you, Desiree.
Okay, what's the name of your podcast? I mean, I asked you at the end too, but just so people know.
Yeah, it's called Subversive. It's really new. I just have like 3 episodes out, so yeah, it should. I don't know. I like it. I endorse it because it's my podcast. So essentially, the concept is to to invite people that are a bit more like heterodox and have some ideas that are outside the box and just interview them and yeah, it's the format.
I do. So my first question to you is just to elaborate a bit more about how you got into thinking and speaking about these topics.
Yeah, I think I've always been kind of interested in ideas. This sounds a bit pompous, but just like the idea of discovering what's really true. And I went to college in the so-called West. I'm originally from Romania. I'm now in Romania, but I spent probably the last 10 years somewhere in the West. Which was I was in Austria, then I was in Barcelona in Spain, and then I lived in the UK for 5 years. So it's been very interesting to kind of have this clash of being from a fairly different culture, Eastern Europe, and then going to the West, becoming educated in the West, and also kind of trying to integrate into the thought patterns of the West. And I actually studied something very similar to gender studies. I have kind of an economics business degree, so I have a major in diversity management, which you can imagine is essentially is very very woke. And I just when I went to college, I thought, okay, this is the mainstream culture of the West. It's kind of an aspirational thing that you want to become when you come from somewhere like Eastern Europe, which we've always looked up to the West. We want to become the West, but then. Also being a bit of an outsider, it became pretty clear to me that it was a pretty incoherent ideology. Like it was very much based on on some premises that were that were faulty, that were just not that wouldn't stand the test of anything, the test of time, the test of science. And then fairly shortly after I got my bachelor degree, I kind of started to to rethink my position on feminism and on all of the doctrine that I've been immersed in for the last 2 years. And also I think it's the collision with reality. Reality does tend to wake you up.
Right. So when you said it's just now, you meant feminism. Like, would it
Yeah.
stand the test of time?
Yeah,
Okay.
feminism, and there's all sorts of things in the woke repertoire, all sorts of things that we're asked to believe on faith alone.
Right. So going off of that and starting from, I guess, one of the reasons why I had an interest in speaking to you. I mean, it's not like I'd never heard any of the things that you were saying before, just being online on the internet. And I don't generally explicitly discuss feminism per se outside of looking at, say, double standards in terms of how men are treated versus how women are treated. I do think I talk about that a bit. Um, and I guess I've also talked about transgender issues a lot, even though that's not the same thing. I personally, a question that I've had is why is everybody lying about men versus women and how they might be different? Because I'm a woman. I think I get along pretty well with men. As an example, first of all, I think the way my brain works is like slightly male, if that makes sense, more so than the average female. I don't know if that makes any sense. So like in very specific things like politics, for example, I mean, I'm very emotional and stuff like that. But when it comes to examining topics, I do think I'm thinking in a way that's like not very feelings based, I guess. And that's not to say women can't do that, or like all women can't do that, but I do think in general that's not something that happens naturally. I feel like I'm saying something very sexist right now, but
You probably are.
I
It's
really
okay.
I really think that.
This is a
And
safe space.
also, yeah, and then also because I'm from Jamaica, so like to give an example of Jamaican culture, a lot of which I don't like. If you listen to a lot of the popular music, which would be like dancehall, reggae. Well, the reggae stuff is like more sweet, like romantic, etc. But the dancehall stuff, like it's very, very common for women to like tear each other down jokingly based off of how attractive they are to a man, for example. So they're like always clearly competing in very witty ways regarding like their body, like them body pop down. I mean, you won't know what I'm saying, I guess, but so and then like if you're going out, you dress up, you go to the club. I mean, I wasn't ever really a big fan of that stuff. I also have friends who've like gotten married very young, and then they already have kids, and all of that stuff just happens normally. And I feel like it's not like something that's really questioned. At the same time, I think there's also a bit of matriarchy, and then there's also like fathers not being present, so that coexists at the same time. But what I'm trying to say is, no one like would find a lot of the things that say you talk about as odd or something to even be spoken about. And I guess that's because they haven't been uh, conditioned or exposed to rhetoric about, say, like women are just like men, or women can just, it's okay to like not be thinking about having a family, for example, or things that I think in the West seem to be sort of pushed subtly, I would say, onto women. So it's been for me a weird, slow, not even realizing it's happening in the background transition to where, say, for example, I recently had a very good friend who got married, who is like, she asked me, oh, like, if you got married, like, why would you want to take your husband's last name? It's like, that's a question. And that's not something that like someone, say, in Jamaica would ask me. Like, they wouldn't be like, why would you want to do that? It would be like, oh, that's a given. And like, what I'm trying to specify is that it's not that these like what feminist ideas don't exist. So I have friends in Jamaica who like they have like both their parents' last name with like the dash in the middle. This is just an example. So like those concepts exist as well, but it's not like going against the grain in any way or seen as odd in any way if you don't do that and you do something that is like more traditional. Whereas here over here, it's like you're always making a statement if you like do something like that. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I don't like that, and but I think that's part of the reason why I was like interested in hearing what you have to say. So I feel like I'm just talking about myself a lot, but I'm trying to explain why I got interested in following you, and I guess could you answer the question of why is everybody lying about like men versus men and women.
Yeah, this is a good question. I think it's the kind of the stages or the waves of feminism. We've kind of moved up the hierarchy of kind of getting to this place where kind of like third wave, fourth wave feminism essentially wants to create kind of this perfect individual, someone who's like free from the conditions of their society and the conditions of patriarchy or whatever structures that surround this individual need to be shed, because you're not really free if you're tied to like traditions or tied to obligations to your family or things like that. And a lot of things that they attribute to the patriarchy are essentially things that are nature, are the fact, that women give birth, that they're, more, they bond with the baby and at a, higher level. There's all sorts of hormones. There's all sorts of things that are very specific to the female life cycle. Fertility, all sorts of things that, people don't really like to discuss because they're constraining. And if you ask, a third or fourth wave feminist, they're going to be like, oh, it's a patriarchy constraining women. They want to see women barefoot and pregnant. They want to see us as, as breeding mares. But the problem is that they confuse the patriarchy with nature itself, and they really want to ignore this aspect of the human female, because it's kind of it's incontestable. You can't really fight it out with nature. It's this is a human female, these are the parameters, there are things she can do, there are things she can't do, but this is something that this egalitarianism that's baked really deeply into the cake of these kind of later stages of feminism, it just can't allow. And another factor that comes into here is the fact that, after the 1950s, once, women got into the workforce, the economic conditions also shifted in a way that, having two people working was almost necessary to have a household. So feminism kind of reconstituted, because a lot of times people think, women, wanting to be girl bosses and wanting to lead the market and whatever Fortune 500 is a feminist initiative. But it's also the other way around. Like, you needed to work, and then feminism came in and kind of provided the theory of why this is a good thing. But after a while, I think it was kind of in the 1970s, productivity dropped so much that women needed to work. So it's kind of, feminism just provides the story why this is empowering. But it's not necessarily empowering, because if you look at the lives of many women, they would definitely opt out if they could.
Right. And speaking about women opting out in terms of the narrative of patriarchy, I mean, I did watch like a Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the former Supreme Court judge who had died. I watched her documentary, which I know was propaganda, but I do think that she had fought against like women not being allowed to go to law school or have certain jobs, and I think that's an actual issue that occurred. However, if you blame everything on like patriarchy and you frame everything as what men want, and you're describing women wanting to opt out, it seems as if no one actually cares what women may want. And so like if there's like nature and there are certain inclinations that a woman might have due to nature, then maybe there are certain things she might want, like having families or not being in the workforce or stuff like that. And I mean, I guess I'm just agreeing with you, but I want to point out that if you're always looking at patriarchy, then you're actually not focusing on what women want either. Like it's not just about men. It's like what do women actually want, and does that agree with your theory of third wave or fourth wave feminism, as opposed to actual possible barriers to equality? Like I know then like they only make it equal in some ways, and you ignore inequalities against men, like in the court system or going to war. So I'm saying that, understanding that even though they say equality, they're also ignoring a lot of things that are not good for men. But I do think that those were legitimate issues. But then when it comes to the current third wave, fourth wave feminism, I think that they ignore what women might want. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was female archetypes. So I'm not even sure if I'm wording that correctly, but in my mind, ideally, I would want someone to go after the things that they want, whether that be a man or a woman. But or more speaking about women here, would you say that there are different roles that a woman can make in society, and feminism is almost restricting one of the natural roles for women in terms of, say, being a nurturer or caretaker in favor of being some kind of worker. And well, I guess just talk about that, because I want there to be a place where women can do that if they want, but I do think that that's almost being suppressed. One part of that is almost one aspect of being a woman is being suppressed, at least in the narratives that I feel like are lying about, like the simple nature, as you said, in terms of you know women make, not on their own, but they like foster the breathing of life into the world, which men don't do.
Yeah, exactly. And there's quite a pretty strong, surprisingly like anti-natalist strain in this whole conversation about feminism. It's like, women are important. They're so important that having children is not important. It's yeah, because it's like you cannot, like I said, having children is already a societal imposition. It's like it takes away your freedom, it takes away your capacity to work. Obviously it's a burden, and you shouldn't have to deal with it if you don't want to, and you shouldn't want to anyway, because it's the patriarchy trying to inject false consciousness into you and tell you that this is something aspirational, though you shouldn't really, because yeah, it's essentially a freedom constraining thing that you're doing while you're having children, because you're sacrificing your individual needs, because it is hard. It's not like you can have a child and then forget about it. It's quite a sacrifice, and it constrains you it constrains you as a producer. It constrains you as a consumer, because you're not going to be making frivolous purchases for yourself. You're just going to be focusing on the child. Obviously, if you're a good parent, if you're a degenerate, then you can do whatever. But hopefully not. Yeah, and I think that's the main constraint here. Just trying to liberate people from anything that might tie them down. And I kind of understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, it also ignores the fact that, like you said, women have certain predispositions. They have certain things that they do tend to want. They do gravitate towards, and just telling them that that's, oh no, that's just the evil whisper of the patriarchy. You've just been memed into thinking that. It's just not true, because these are a lot of times like just biological compulsions, biological desires, and also the sad thing is that women are not told about timelines, because in this whole paradigm that women are like men. Yeah, you're like men until maybe you're 25 years old, and then you slowly are not like men, because you can have the same career prospects, the same trajectory. And for example, if when a man's 35, he's just at the top of his game, he's made partner, he's just, ready to settle down. But if you're a woman and you're 35, you have to think fast. It's just not the same thing. And very few people talk about fertility. Very few people talk about the fact that things like freezing your eggs is just not feasible, because one, it doesn't really work, and having children at 40 is not a chill thing. You're probably going to be tired, and it's not going to be the funny, awesome adventure you think it's going to be. So there's so many little constraints like that, and just lying to women just to make sure that they have this fake freedom to go on trips and consume your products is quite tragic. And I've seen, that's kind of why I've started speaking up about this as well. It's like, I see these cases, I see these women, they're not happy, they don't know what's wrong, because there's very few people are talking about this. They might be talking about it in a more realistic way with their girlfriends, but the mainstream, tells them that, oh, you go girl, you're going to be a girl boss, you're going to, make partner or whatever, career aspiration. But, anyone who's spent, 10 years climbing the corporate ladder knows that with each rung, it's just, there's more responsibility. You might be making more money, but you're spending much more time in the office as well. It's not like, you're gaining some royal status once you're in the Fortune 500. It's a lot of work. It's like being a pro athlete. If you're a CEO, it's quite a tough gig.
Yeah. Um, Another question. Well, I guess I should first say that I agree with what you're saying. But another question that I had for you, or topic that I wanted to discuss, was knowing things about how humans work. And we're discussing men and women here. Um, how do you balance giving people freedom to do what they want, assuming that they're not like directly harming another person, but still guide society morally? And the specific example I want to bring up, that you've spoken about a lot, is OnlyFans. So that's just one specific thing. I made a video on Pornhub where I went into a little bit of detail about what I thought about that topic, and I see this a lot. I see people doing things that I know are not good for them, but I think that they should be allowed to do it because, well, it's their life. But I also feel sad because you also know that there's something happening with young men in society in terms of not being able to make connections with women. Young people are not having as much sex. That's one of the stats that I've seen out there, as much as they used to. And it's probably gotten so much worse now with COVID, with people being isolated and also put out of work. Um, I'm more oriented towards freedom, but I've seen you talk about how even though you want to allow space for people who are not the norm, for the vast majority of people, certain things are probably not good for them. So could you just talk about that?
Yeah. I think there's a bit of a difference between being legal or protected under the law, or like just in the case of prostitution or things like that. I don't think that the people who practice it should be thrown to the lions and arrested or destroyed or things like that. But the idea that because some people are engaging it and we shouldn't attack them for it, that a lot of these things should be destigmatized, because you hear this all the time now. We need to normalize, destigmatize. It's the whole thing where a lot of things like this that, people say, oh, it's not hurting anyone. This is, consenting adults. The only moral limit that we still have is this idea of consent. The thing is that, things don't happen in a vacuum. Like, for example, if I were to choose to, engage and, have build an OnlyFans profile, I am a part of my community. I'm a part of, if I were to post it on Twitter, there's, quite a few thousand people following me, you know, people are mimetic creatures. We do what other people do. We engage in things that are in front of us, that are glorified, that people that we respect or look up to are doing. And this idea that it's consenting adults, they know what they're doing, is a bit hard to digest, especially given that our society insists to say that the kids at 18 years old, they're adults, they know what they're doing. But with the death of religion, with the death of like more close family structures that kind of teach people a little bit of a moral background, give them a little bit of guidance, to expect that people will make good decisions just when they hit 18. And when things like OnlyFans are paraded around and told, I mean, people tell them, oh, there are people making 100,000 a month, I don't know, bending over naked or whatever people do on the platform. It's quite enticing. And if you don't have any sort of perspective to think like, how might this impact me? How might this impact my mental health? How might this impact, the society that I live in? What are the scale implications of this? What does this massive amount of pornography do to the consumer? Like you said, young men are almost completely driven mad by the amount of pornography and the availability of it online. What do these platforms do with it? Like, did you know that OnlyFans has like a slot machine logic built into it? It's addictive because it's made on like a slot, like it has intermittent rewards baked into the interface. Like this is a machine for addiction. And people who make it are very smart because this is how they keep you on the site. This is how they make you pay. And I feel like both the producer and the consumer are losing here, and OnlyFans is making so much money. And us, because we're like, oh, live and let live. It's not hurting anyone. We shouldn't get involved in it because it's all consenting adults. But I think consent is not the final frontier of morality, and I think we're starting to learn this the hard way.
Yeah, that's a great statement. Consent is not the final frontier of morality. I guess for me, one thing that I want to do is talk about it. I guess that's my solution. Is because I do want people to do what they want to a certain degree, but I also think that if you know that something might not be good, and like here we're talking about the OnlyFans, but earlier we were talking about what women might want, then like you kind of have a responsibility to say something to like let people know, okay, do what you want, but maybe you're not being given all the information that should be affecting the decisions that you're making. Okay. So one other thing that I wanted to talk about was so a lot of times on the internet I see a lot of blame going on between the sexes. And my opinion, this is just my opinion on this, and I'm hoping that you agree, but of course you don't have to, or you can have some nuanced perspective, is that you can't blame other people for like what's happening in your life. So I say that while understanding that there's like a social context, as we're just talking about. And so say like with men and like the court system being skewed against them, that's really obvious. Or I say this I say this hoping it will be taken with a grain of salt. Or in the past with the court system being skewed against women, but I think that's only if you're not looking for the ways it might have been skewed against men. Even though there are things that might be set up against you, you can't be blaming, in my opinion, the other sex for like the outcomes of your life, because ultimately who you bring into your life has to do with who you are. And I don't think it's good in recognizing that society might be doing bad things to not be focusing on building oneself up as a person and being content with taking care of oneself as on their own, even knowing that you might be losing something that is really meaningful. So, you know, to put this from the perspective of a man, maybe he might not be able to find to like build a family, or for a woman the same thing when she's older. And in some ways you can partly blame society for that, because say you can't find a virtuous woman, or because of how society has been affecting what women are like. And then for women, because they've been not been told the truth about their timelines, then that hurts them later in life. I still think that they have to accept that and take care of themselves regardless, rather than, you know, blanket blaming the other sex. I mean, I can't even say I see it more from men or women. I see both sides doing that. Women more through like modern day feminism stuff, but men too, with like some of the MGTOW stuff that I've seen online. So, do you agree with what I'm saying, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have to say I agree. Like overall, I do. I really do think personal virtue, becoming your best self, whatever self helpy thing you want to interject here has to be a priority, because whatever context you're in, you're the only person responsible for yourself. Obviously. That being said, I understand why people have a bit of um, yeah, there is tension between the sexes. And like you said, it happens in the mainstream with women. It's all over. Kill all men, whatever hashtag you like. There's all sorts of people that are quite rabid about it, and it's also it's kind of quite a high status thing to do now, and I think that's why a lot of women kind of gravitate towards it. And for men, it's probably happening in more secret forums, of, behind anonymous avatars, things like that. But it's happening. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
in the incel forums. I've been on the MGTOW stuff, and yeah, I mean, there's some really pissed off people, and I get it. But at the same time, like you said, the blame isn't really, I can't put collective blame on women. It's not like the women had like a big meeting, I don't know, in the 1950s and said, from now on we're just going to be total bitches, and we're going to be on the warpath against men. A lot of this stuff is kind of downstream from historical, political, and even like technological factors. Just the way the territory flows is also kind of what influenced women. Like the example is always like the washing machine did more for female empowerment than 20 years of suffragettes marching and things like that. And it is true, like little things like this really changed the landscape. And they allowed some things. They made certain ideas more palatable. Women being in the workplace, you did empower them. These things are emergent from the nature of history and how it flows. So blaming either men or women is not going to do it. And I think you need to look at the territory, make a good map, understand where you are, understand human nature, understand men, women, and then you make the best of what you have. And that's the only thing anyone can ever do. And blaming other people is just going to waste your time and and I don't know, increase your internet bill. It's not very good.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to be releasing this interview around the time of like February, because I or March, or it's sometime away, because they have the like International Women's Day and that kind of stuff. And I guess I want to get a message out there, and what is advice that you would give to women specifically, based on the current climate, social climate?
Yeah. I think they should take the red pill. it, um, I think it is hard to be, especially a young woman now, because there's so much stuff. On the one hand, pandering to you, because women are the biggest consumer demographic we have. Women make, I think, what 70-80% of purchases in the market.
80%. I've looked at that
Yeah.
statistic. Yeah.
So the market for pandering to women is immense. So try to shut your ears off. Try to maybe read a little bit of classical literature, maybe a little bit of evolutionary biology. Just kind of understand, make a map of the territory, understand where you are, and then kind of in a way almost like a meditative state, kind of feel into yourself and imagine what the life is that you want to lead, kind of independently of what people tell you that you should want to do. Because you might wake up, you might be following the trendiest path in life, the one that maximizes your how much fusion cuisine you consume, how many trips you take, how many wine tastings you go to, but it's gonna end lead to a dead end in like 10 years. So think about it, and also think about your life in its entirety. Don't think about it in like, how am I going to optimize the next 5 years and make them jam packed with fun, but think about yourself as also a part of a lineage. Think about yourself in the context of your family, of your society, of kind of like Jordan Peterson describes those concentric circles of learn to take care of yourself, your family, and then you can go out and contribute. So yeah, that's kind of my basic advice.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really agree with listening to yourself and getting in touch with yourself, because a lot of the reason behind why it feels like everything is a lie is because people, I think, aren't in touch with themselves, biologically. And that's not to say we can't like change, or we have to only succumb to instinct. But I do think that we want people in society to be happy. And I don't really think that nature in this way is like leading us astray. I don't think that. And I just wanted to bring up what happened last year with Amy Coney Barrett being confirmed to the Supreme Court. And again, just trying to give people or tell people that they can, well, to the like 20% of women who listen to my podcast, because it's mostly men who listen, but the way that they were like tearing that woman down, even though she was female, which is like what they meaning like feminist writers out there, or I mean just mainstream publications, who if she was like not say conservative, or if she was the right kind of politically right kind of woman, she would be praised. I mean, I just thought that that was terrible. Like, I mean, I guess to try to be more specific, they were comparing her to like the handmaid and like that kind of stuff, which to me seems insane. Because she was like Christian, and she had like kids and all of that. Like, there are lots of political women on the left who have also had lots of kids or whatever, but they didn't focus on that. They don't focus on that for them. But it seems to me the fact that they were shaming her a lot in this way says a lot about how they view women who might want that kind of role, I guess. And I mean, she's also a lawyer. Like, she also has a lot of like accomplishments outside of that it seemed weren't even being focused on. I guess that disturbed me, because I would think that mainstream society would be happy that someone was doing what they wanted. And so I really want to agree with you to not pay attention to what society is saying, but to pay attention to what you might want. And it's also telling myself, like I'm interested, personally in this topic. So I guess I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I think it's quite telling, how rabid people can get about opposition and how fast their principles, especially about things like, I don't know, gender or things like that, fall away quite quickly. I mean, it's the same effect. Like, I don't know, was it Kanye or someone who I think, was it Joe Biden who said that he ain't black because he's voting the wrong way or things like that. You lose your credentials as a protected category if you make the wrong moves or say you like something that's from the naughty list. So yeah, they did the same to Kellyanne Conway or any other woman that's a girl boss but is bossing on the other side. So yeah, it's like that famous quote about politics being about the distinction between your friend and your enemy, and that's kind of what it boils down to. All the principles are good and fine if they're for our friends. People on our side get all the principles. The enemies get none. And the fact that they don't see the hypocrisy, because I mean there's a whole industry of liberal hypocrisy being pointed out every day. Still, they don't budge. They don't care. So it's quite, yeah. It was quite shocking the way they treated her. But yeah, I mean, in the end, she's there, and also in the end, nothing's really happening. So their worst fears were not fulfilled.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's appalling what they did, and I want to press that example home because I really don't think that people who say that they care about not just women, but we're talking about women in this context, what women want actually care. I think they just say that, as you said, in terms of principles not really mattering. So I think that I've covered everything that I specifically wanted to ask you about. I'm just thinking in my head if there was anything else. I don't think so. Do you have any final thoughts? You don't have to. I know we can cut out a lot of this part about what to talk about.
Not really. I mean, I think we covered the main gist of my gripe with feminism pretty well.
Okay. And do you have any questions for me potentially? Because we're finishing early, so I'm just trying to see if there's anything else.
Yeah, of course. I actually wanted to ask you if you think, because we're kind of, we're from different cultures, but you're from Jamaica, I'm from Eastern Europe. We both lived in the West for a while. Do you think that this is a kind of an important factor, that gives you the necessary perspective to be noticing this stuff? Because I do feel like, people who have, grown up in the West for, since they were little, that it's the water they swim in. So they don't really feel as shocked by the discrepancy and by the lack of truth as like, I don't know, me or you. And it might be like an advantage to have this.
I do think so, and a really good example of this is I have a really good friend in Jamaica who I've discussed both racial and gender issues with, and like not in great detail because she doesn't care that much, but like the other day I was asking her, I don't know how it came up, but we were talking about feminism, and she's in Trinidad. And the first thing she was like, the first thing she said was, like, I don't like it because they just hate men. This is straight out of her mouth. And I just thought it was really, really funny because, like, I hadn't really given her my opinion or anything. That was, like, her, whatever she had seen or read somewhere. And I do think that a lot of people over here wouldn't see that. So I think there's something to that. The cultural thing and being an outsider that seems more obvious. So I guess, yeah, yes, to answer your question.
Yeah, I've had that with people I know in Romania as well. Like I was pretty much a very early feminist here, and everyone was thought that I was nuts, and now I have to agree with them. Yeah, I was pretty nuts, but but it was something new. It was interesting because it was kind of like an import ideology from the West. I just went there, went to college, got indoctrinated real hard for about 2 years. Then I came back here and I was like, guys, haven't you heard about stereotype threat and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, these peasants, they know nothing. But actually, if you look at the replication crisis, the stereotype threat is not really a valid concept. So yeah, anyway.
Well, it's funny that you're talking about going to university and stuff, because like I came here and I studied biology and studio arts, and then I did business more recently. But I didn't do any explicitly woke thing. Like I wasn't into that. Now I did go to a very liberal arts college, so I was exposed to that regardless. And I think what made me start thinking about this was realizing how subtle it was. It's just like this given thing that like men are to blame for any like bad thing when it comes to women, or I guess the racial stuff too is an obvious thing to me. And I think it definitely has to do with not coming from that. So you're kind of like, huh, what is this like assumption that everybody has that I'm not used to seeing? Like that does happen. So.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Like I think it might be that, coming from Eastern Europe, the biggest thing you want to do is become Western. It's like a big aspiration. So if you're an Eastern European student, you want to go to the West and like kind of integrate and become one of them. So I think the fact that you go there and there are all these like aspirational ideologies, they really stick to you for a while. But then like I said, you kind of have to, if you're at least if you're a bit more interested in what's real rather than what's high status, you're going to figure it out eventually. But it is really enticing at the beginning because you're like, okay, is this what the kids here believe? Okay, well, I'll go along with it for a while.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I think I'm gonna end the conversation here, even though I think we could talk for some more. Thank you very much for your time. This conversation is meaningful to me to have with you, and it's something that I haven't really thought through before, say like last year or 2 years ago, but it was something that was like kind of brewing in the back of my head, but didn't take up my mind as much when it came to identity politics kind of stuff. And yeah, I guess that's it. Would you like to tell people again where to find you and what you talk about?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Like the main hub for me is at the moment, hopefully for longer, as my Twitter. So it's at Kaschuta. It's my my last name. And I also now host a subversive podcast, which is on all the platforms and also on YouTube as well. So you can find that at subversive Kaschuta. If you type that in, it should pop up somewhere. And I write essays like all over the place. And I also have a Substack where I do write essays. So it's alexkaschuta.substack.com.
All right. So I do recommend that you guys go ahead and do that. And I have to remind you to support this show and this content. If you like hearing these conversations, you can do that at justthinkingoutloud.tv/support. And I hope that you found use from this conversation, and you let us know in the comments or I guess elsewhere what you think. I also hope that you have a good day. Goodbye.